springtime along the network at the CBC as we present the music of Sandy DeSantis and his orchestra from the Palomar, Canada's most beautiful ballroom located in downtown Vancouver. Vocalists on tonight's program, Ethel Lang.
Thanks everybody. I'm actually blown away because since COVID, we've had smaller and smaller groups here and more people watching us online. And so this is back up to a full house, and I'm so thrilled that you're all here. So a lot of you in VHS know me as the treasurer, and I'm always sitting at the back with Jan, and so it's kind of intimidating to see all of you guys looking at me when I'm actually looking at your backs. But I'll tell you a little bit about what I actually do for my day job. So I actually work in heritage, or not heritage, I work in history, in painting Vancouver history. And here, without further ado, there. Okay, this is the kind of stuff that I do. This is obviously a panorama over the city in the early 50s, and I'm known for these kind of panoramas, and they require a tremendous amount of research, as you can imagine, because the views I do, I'm not just basing them on an existing photograph. I'm extrapolating a new view that based on a lot of photographs and a lot of archival plans and maps and that kind of thing. Now, that's what I do as my day job. What I do on the side is I collect Vancouver entertainment history, and most specifically things that are on their way to the landfill and will be lost forever. And so those are the kind of things that I might tell you a little bit about my favorite painting stories tonight and a little bit about my favorite rescues. And so without further ado, let's look at that. A background is I'm actually from Surrey, and I moved into Vancouver 20 years ago, although we were always back and forth into Vancouver. And so when I was a kid, I was really into old music. So I was classically trained, but I used to like ragtime, and I used to like playing silent film music and this kind of. I was kind of a weird kid. And to this day, actually, sometimes I get to play the Wurlitzer at the Orpheum, and I absolutely love that. And so these are radio transcriptions that I collected when I was a kid. I collected 78s and radio transcriptions. I would comb junk shops and flea markets, and back in the 70s you could still find these things. And this got me very interested in Vancouver radio history. I used to listen to Cullen's Owl Prowl every night, like a lot of us, I'm sure. And so I would actually learn all of this kind of music, but I learned how to play rock so that I would fit in with my peers. And so I played rock bands. But in the closet, I was a jazz guy, you know. that was one of the closets I was in at the time. So that got me out of high school. I got into the music business, and this was my studio. It was called Magic Lab, and we built this. It actually was a 3-studio. We had a Studio A, B, and C. This is Studio A, and this is the control room for A. And I had a really great career in the recording business, and we even had a small record label. And I got to work with a lot of artists that I really had a lot of regard for, including a lot of people that were in Vancouver music back in the 40s and 50s, and even earlier. So I got to work with people like Alberta Slim and Lance Harrison, and they actually went back even to the 30s. And so I got to know these guys quite well. And we would talk about the olden days and playing the Palomar and the Cave and a lot of the earlier venues. And let me see, I even did some horn arrangements for Del Richards when I was in my 20s. You know, he really intimidated me. I was really freaked out by him. But later on, you know, when I was in my 50s, I got to know him a bit better, and he was a very nice guy. So this is a day at the office for me back then, and I played on a lot of records. And this is me in the producer's desk over on the left when I still had some hair. And I'm producing a record there. Now, so this all went really, really well, and I had a great career until about 2000, when the whole record business just caved in, and a lot of my friends and colleagues lost their businesses, and we were, you know, going down the drain as well. So we sold all of that, and I moved downtown and got into real estate marketing, of all things, and I bought my loft downtown. And I realized that I was 39 years old, and I had a huge shift where I lost my business and I was doing something new. And I realized that I was the same age as my granddad was when he moved into Vancouver in 1930. And so he was 39 years old. He had lost his businesses on the prairies, and he had a failed marriage, and he came and rebuilt his life from the ground up, which was what I was doing. So I wanted to know more about him, because he ended up becoming very, very prosperous again. And so I found out that he had a restaurant on Hastings Street, That's all my dad really knew, but he got out when the restaurant was damaged by a bomb across the street. So a theater was bombed, and the ticket office flew across Hastings Street through his restaurant window. And apparently, he said to his partners, he says, okay, he took the money out of the till, and he said, okay, that should make us square. He says, this place is getting too rough, and I'm out of here. And that was in 1933. So the theater that was bombed was this one. This is the Royal Theater, and which was the old Pantages. And at this point in 33, there was a war going on between two competing motion picture projection unions, and these guys were playing rough. They bombed this theater, they bombed two others in the States, and here's the aftermath the next day. My granddad's probably in that bunch, you know, looking at the damage. They actually sent this guy through the roof of his car. They tried to kill him. He was a projectionist at the Colonial Theatre on Granville Street. And one night he came, turned his lights on to go home, and the bomb went off. And thankfully he survived. He went right through the roof of the car. But I found out that this was the cafe that my granddad had. And it was called the Vancouver Cafe and Grill, right beside the Balmoral Hotel. And there he is standing in front of it. And so I started to paint views of Vancouver. That got me into the archives, really digging in. And I thought, okay, for my own enjoyment, I'm going to start painting old historic views of Vancouver, because it was a real great way for me to connect with the city and connect with my family's history. Also, I should say that I had a lot of time on my hands because after the music business, I gave up all my partying habits for a while, so I had lots and lots of time to paint, and that was very healthy for me. Well, a couple of years after I started doing this, the real estate developer that I was working for, he had business troubles, and the whole thing kind of went sideways, and so I was out on the street, not on the street, but I was looking for work again, except this time with a mortgage. So thankfully, I was offered a show at an art gallery, and this was sort of the beginning of what I do now. But they only wanted the Vancouver historical views, and so I got busy painting. And the biggest one of the show that sold is this one, and that put me in a position where I was now doing this. This is obviously a view looking north down Granville Street. And so I was offered a show 6 months after that, and I was consistently painting Vancouver historical scenes, which is pretty unbelievable. The next big painting I did, the next show, was this one. It's obviously looking up Granville Street from Smythe, and this is the beginning of me doing a lot of theaters and a lot of entertainment. Incidentally, I showed Del Richards this painting, and he said, "Oh, above that sweet Caporal sign, there's a window." He says, "Menka used to live up in that apartment," and I said, "Well, who's that?" And he said, "Well, she was a high-priced sort of lady for hire, and apparently she and her fur coat would show up in the panorama roof at the Hotel Vancouver on the arm of a different visiting executive or politician all the time." And so he said, "Yeah, we all knew Menka, but of course they didn't know that the band all knew Menka." So that's a story now that you know, because Del told it to me just off the cuff, and it would have been lost forever, and now you know. So when you're down there, you can think of her. Now, I'm going to show you something. This is all acrylic on canvas, and I can print this on canvas again through a process called giclée, and then I can paint over that again. And so I can do multiple versions of this painting. And here's what it looks like making it into the nighttime, putting traffic in. And so I can do alternate versions of paintings in a mixed media style like this, which is really fun. So this started me kind of doing commissions for big companies, and this is one that I did for Bank of Montreal. You can kind of see it's looking down Granville on the left, and then we pan across until we're looking west down Hastings towards the Marine Building. Well, this is with a commission painting. The client, in case you've never done these kind of things before, the client calls me up and says, "Okay, why don't we meet and throw around some ideas?" So the first idea I proposed was the doodle on the top, and they said, "Okay, it's got to have the Bank of Montreal in it. Man, we want to have the Marine Building, and we want to have Stanley Park." And they gave me a little laundry list of things they'd like in this painting, and it's going to be such and such dimensions because it's going in the boardroom. This one was 4 feet by 12 feet, and so the first illustration at the top, I showed them, and they said, "Well, this is really good, except that the Bank of Montreal is down at the bottom right, and it's the smallest bank in the view. And then the CIBC is behind it, it's an even bigger, and then the Royal Bank is towering above us all. So he said, this is really good. You've got the competition swamping the Bank of Montreal. So I came up quickly with the other version, and that has the Bank of Montreal at the bottom left, and we have our backs to the other banks. And then we pan the camera across the view so that we end up with the Marine Building on the right. And this turned out really well because it gave us way more of the historic landmarks. And I'll show you, oops, I'm going the wrong way. Okay, so this is how I've constructed the painting. You can see those white blocks. That's actually the size that those buildings should be. And so the Bank of Montreal, I've actually made it bigger than it really is. And then the Hall building and the Stock Exchange, I've actually brought them down. So I sink them down through the floor so that we can see over top of them. And then I also make the Credit Foncier building smaller. And this way, I use, it's kind of selective compression and expansion. Certain buildings I want to see, I make them a little bit bigger, and I scale the other ones down a little bit. I got this technique actually from Walt Disney. This is how Disney used to do his background art back in the 40s and 50s, is they would actually rig the drawing so that as the camera pans across it, it looks as though the camera is actually moving through the landscape. It's a sleight of hand trick, and I like to use that in my paintings. So people often wonder, with the paintings, they look kind of realistic, but there's no way you could get all that stuff squished in that one view. Well, that's how I do it. Okay, so, and if you see the red squiggly line over there, that's Hornby Street. And so you can see every time we go behind a building, Hornby Street shows up in a different location. And the reason I do that is so that we can actually, again, we can compress the city and show more of it. The blue, those little blue figures at the top, those are anchor points. So 18 inches in from the side, we're looking down Granville. 18 inches from the right side, we're looking down Hastings. And then we have the Hotel Vancouver. So you can sort of see, how I balance the painting out. And there are some of my tricks for you. And this is the finished painting in the boardroom in the Bent Hall Center. Yeah. And that led me to a couple of really neat, I did a series of panoramas like this. These are all 4 foot by 5 foot, Victory Square. This one's based on an Otto Landauer photograph. Usually I come up with my own, my own views, but this one I like the Landauer photo so much I based it on that. This is the construction of the new Granville Bridge, the one we have now, and the old swing span beside it, which I thought was really interesting, and how, little mysteries like you have Old Bridge Street down on Granville Street, or Granville Island. Well, that's why it's called Old Bridge Street, Old Bridge Road. One thing I want to point out is usually I'm working with black and white photographs, so I have to guess all the colors, and just sometimes, you have an existing building, you can go down and find out what color the brick is and that kind of thing. But sometimes you really have to guess. Well, I found a color movie of the construction of the Granville Bridge years after I made this painting, and here it is. And look at that. The colors are exactly the same. Yeah. That's miraculous. Okay, so here's that painting in an exhibit I had in Gastown. And here's the Otto Landauer one. I like how when the guy's looking at it, it looks like he's looking at a model, It's really kind of neat. It's one of the things I found is really effective with the aerial landscapes is when I'm doing that selective compression and expansion, that's actually an old modeling trick when you're doing like model railroading, is the things like the trains and the cars are to scale, but the buildings, you scale them down a little bit so that you can actually squish more into the model. And I paint that way, and so there's a charm to that. It's almost toy-like, but it looks real for some reason, and no, people seem to like it as much as I do, which is great. Okay, at that show, I met John Atkin, and this is where we go off into some serious archaeological rescue, because I was in the Pantages Theatre when they were going to restore it. As you can see, this is a couple of years before my show. And then John was giving a lecture at my exhibit, a little talk, and I knew that he knew the demolition guys, and so I asked if I could get in and maybe rescue a couple of things, or just see what it looked like. And so John got me. This is what John photographed when it was still in good shape, and by the time we got into the site, this is what it looked like. But I could see that there were still things that were that were savable, you know, and like the beautiful cartouche that's above the guy's head. There's a beautiful crest up near the ceiling, and there's sections of the balcony. I thought, you know, if I could just save a couple of these things, at least it wouldn't be completely gone. And so I asked the demolition guys if that was possible. And they said, yeah, just bring some money. And, you know, yeah, you bring money and everything's possible, you know. So I came by the demolition site with some cash every morning, and they would give me what they had taken down that previous day. And it was never quite what I wanted. It was always something a little bit different that was neat, but it wasn't what I wanted. And so I kept on going back, and the more I came back, you know, occasionally I would get what I wanted, but I'd get a lot more. And so here's the piece of the balcony, but I ended up with 5 of them, or 5 or 6. And here's the crest that was up at the top, but I ended up with 4 of them. And so this is my living room at the beginning of this journey, and I ended up with quite a bit more than this, as my friends will attest, who are storing it in their basements and garages. You know, yeah. One of the neat things that I got was this barrel, and this, you can see from the ropes that you'd wear this over your shoulders, and it's actually a sign that you'd walk up and down Hastings Street with, and you'll have a barrel of fun at the State Theatre. And this was the State Theatre. You can see on the far right, or far left, sorry. The far left is the State, and the far right is my grandfather's cafe. It's still there. This is the Peony Parade in 1948. And the State was a vaudeville house, but a little bit on the risque side. So they called it vaudeville, but the jokes were a bit blue, and the dancers were a little bit skimpy, but it was still vaudeville. They got shut down quite a bit and then had to reopen. And so I used the history of that theater and that part of town for the cover of Vancouver Confidential, which was a book that I had the great privilege of working with, and that's how I met a lot of my friends that you'll know, like Eve Lazarus and Lanny Russworm, and a lot of wonderful people, and Cat Rose. So these are 2 proposal paintings for that book cover. One was looking left, or one looking left. One's looking east, and one is looking west, and around Hastings in Maine. And I did 18 by 24-inch paintings just to sort of get a feel for it. And then we chose the one on the right, and so I made a full-size version of that, which is 4 times as big. What I want to point out in this painting, again, this is an aerial view there's never been a photograph taken of it, so it's kind of neat to have this in color. You'll notice the Grand Union, which is that mess of streetcar tracks in the foreground. A Grand Union is where there's turnoffs that go in every direction, so a streetcar can go anywhere. And this was the only Grand Union in the entire BC Electric system. And I find it very fitting that it's at Hastings in Maine, which was considered the crossroads of the city. So we have this Grand Union at Hastings in Maine, and then you look down Hastings Street and you see the Pantages, and then at the very end of the street you see the Hastings Odeon, which was the second Pantages. Now, I worked on my essay here with a friend that I'd made called Arthur Irving, and here's me and Arthur. Arthur tried to save the second Pantages, and he didn't succeed, but he saved a lot of it. And he found out that I was trying to save pieces of the first Pantages, and so that became a good friendship. And we swapped a lot of notes, and I learned a lot from Arthur. This is Arthur's Pantages. This is the one that was where the Potluck Cafe is now. And this is what it looked like on the inside. It was absolutely gorgeous. It was designed by Marcus Pertica, who designed our Orpheum, our current Orpheum. And so Arthur became friends with Mr. Pertica when he was still alive, of course, and Mr. Pertica gave him construction drawings and blueprints and photographs and all sorts of things. And this is a view looking east in the same room, and I show you this because here's a close-up of the exit sign over the door, and everything in this building was over the top. It was all like inlaid mosaics and stained glass and heavily carved and gilded wood. Really beautiful. Well, this is the exit light, and Arthur actually managed to save a lot of the relics of this theater before it was demolished. And so he's also saved a little bit of the floor. You can see that I'm holding there. And Babe Ruth actually was on that floor. And so it's kind of neat to think that maybe Babe Ruth stood on that piece of maple that I'm holding. I like to think that anyway. But you know, of course, Arthur's gone now, and I ended up with all of his artifacts, which shows you that when you rescue something the first time, you know, 30, 40 years later, you kind of have to rescue it again, because you know, if I wouldn't have been around to get that stuff from Arthur, it would have ended up in the dump instead of in 1967. It would have been a couple of years ago. So thank God we saved it. But this theater reclamation keeps on going. So thanks to Elwin. Elwin, you're responsible for this. Yeah, because these seats, Elwin called me up and he said, hey, there's some Pantages Theatre seats up in Fruitvale, BC, and the guy needs to find a home for them. So they took them out of the theater, the 1917 theater, in 1938, and they went up to the Trail High School auditorium where they were building. And then when they renovated that in the 70s, they threw most of them out, and these ended up in the curling rink up in Fruitvale, and then we ended up getting some of those. I mean, thanks to my friend Bill, who drove up all the way into the middle of nowhere to get them. Bill, I'll tell you what, if it wasn't for friends I have like Bill and John Atkin and a bunch of people and their patient wives who are storing all this stuff in their basements and garages, I don't know what I would do. So thanks. And this shows the original paint job. These are them in my living room. That's another project I have, is to restore some of these. So this is Arthur's Theatre. This is from a Christmas card I did. Arthur asked me every year I do a Christmas card for my friends and family, and so if you want to be on my Christmas card list, let me know. I will make a painting. And this year it was it was the beacon, and Arthur told me what color all the neon was supposed to be, which of course would be lost to history because all the photographs are black and white. So now we know what the beacon neon was. He also told me how the sign was animated, and these are the things that when you're digging into neon, we have no idea how the signs actually moved sometimes, you know. And so this was a wonderful thing to find out. Here's that theater when it was the Pantages, and Hastings at that point was considered Vancouver's Great White Way, which was a reference to Broadway, and so we were the center of vaudeville. And what vaudeville is, for those who don't know, it's variety, and that happened before motion pictures. So it was usually you'd have an act of say 5 or 6. Different acts on a bill, and then they would cycle over and over. We had there's the Pantages, of course, you can see prominently. Beside it and up the street is the National and the Columbia. Across the street is the Rex, and then down here in the bottom corner is the Bijou. And so this brings me to some vaudeville collections that I've been able to rescue, and this is Jack Strong and his Wonder Show. So a lot of these photos are Yu Cho Chow photos, by the way. So here's Mr. Strong doing what he did, was balancing women and bending iron, and here's a couple of neat photographs of him. I don't know how he has this lady balance on his chin, and how did she get up there? I have no idea how he I would have paid 25 cents to see that. Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah. And then look at this lady, she's a pretzel. And I have a bunch of different photos. These are Yu Cho Chow photos of this lady, and she's just so contorted. Well, this was Jack Strong's girlfriend over on the right. That's Pat LaBelle, and she seems like a lot of fun. And here, this is her and her sister in their dancing outfits. So they were part of the Wonder Show that he had, which was a traveling vaudeville show that went around. It went around to small town halls all through BC and Alberta, and even into Saskatchewan. So we talk about the A circuit and the B circuit. This was like the Z circuit, but it would have been a lot of fun. I mean, it looks kind of cheesy. She was also Pat LaBelle was Canada's female Houdini, so she hung outside of buildings in straitjackets, and here's the crowd that she attracts. Now, ironically, she was killed in a car crash at the intersection of Thurlow and Nelson in the West End, and her car was broadsided in 1930. She was only 23 years old. So to me, it's interesting how she could hang outside of skyscrapers in straitjackets and survive all those years, but one traffic accident and she's gone. So I actually want to do a shout out to my friends at UBC iSchool, which used to be the School of Library, Archival, and Information Studies. I think I got that right. Yeah. And anyway, every year my friends at the iSchool take one of my collections and they do a fabulous job turning it into a digital archive. And one year they took Jack Strong's Wonder Show, and you can see it online. It's absolutely amazing. They took all the scrapbooks, and they're all searchable, so you can put in search terms, and the scrapbooks are easy to find, whatever you want. And there's lots and lots of posters and photographs. I'm just showing you a couple of things from this collection, but this is one of my favorites. Now, this was a newsprint, one of those posters that would be pasted onto a fence or onto a telephone pole. You know, vaudeville shows used to have tons of them. You see pictures in the Vancouver archives of fences in Vancouver that have these posters all over them. But they never survive, and this one is the only copy, and it's just so fragile that it just crumbles when you even look at it. So I can't take it out of its envelope anymore. And what Slace did is they digitally reconstructed it, so now it's like that. And it's absolutely brand new, and now I can make as many copies as I want full size, which is wonderful. So I like the great Omar, and he knows all and sees all and he tells all, which is good. Okay, so another collection that I found is Mr. Bush's orchestras. Now, George W.T. Bush, very unfortunate name, you know? But at least they put the T in there so we can tell him from the other ones. He was amongst other things, he was a banjo player, and he led some orchestras during the period that I love, which is the 1920s jazz dance band era. And so we were called to a house on Point Grey Road, and the lady there was his daughter-in-law. He'd long gone, and his son, her husband, had long gone. But the house was being gutted and moved, I think. And she said, "Look, there's some stuff in here you gotta rescue." So what I found, this is Mr. Bush, by the way, at the Café Deluxe on Hastings Street with his banjo. So all I found initially were these items, and there's nothing that interesting in there. There's just a couple of pictures of other people. So I was disappointed, and there was a box of moldy sheet music that I didn't think was anything but piano music. She said, "Come on back." This is a couple of weeks later. She says, "I think you should have a second look." So we came back and got all the music, and I started to dry it out and sort it out because it was just a mess. And what I found was these are scores, these are folios, and the music it ends up is open score for a dance band. So this is orchestral sheet music and arrangements for hot 1920s jazz tunes. And there's, as you can see, there's a folio for the E-flat alto sax, the trumpet, you know, drums, bass, everything. And the musicians would have these folios, and then all the songs were numbered. They could take them home and rehearse, but at the gig, the leader would say, "Okay, take out this number, this number, this number." They'd take out the stuff from the folio, put it on the music stands, they'd play their gig, and then they'd put it all back in, you know, and that's how bands used to play. Well, I could tell once I'd sorted out all this stuff that everything ended in 1929. So this dance band, this jazz dance band from Vancouver had played their last gig in 29, thrown everything into a box on Point Grey Road, and that was the end of it. So we had a perfect microcosm, like just a microcosm of what a dance band would be playing in Vancouver. And alongside that, so here's the whole collection sorted out. And there's over 240 songs done in open score, which is unbelievable. There's also these signs, which I thought were intriguing because they had holes punched in them. So I suspected they were for cueing what the next songs were, like so the audience could tell. So you could say to your date, "Okay, well, why don't we sit out, you know, the one step, but we'll do the waltz," that kind of thing. And so then we found this photograph. So a couple of trips later, you know, coming back and getting more and more, we found this picture of that light box in the back behind the band. And so there it is. And the sign, of course, for the originals, we figured that the last incarnation of the band was the originals. They played Leicester Court in 1929. That might very well be the last time this music was played. And Leicester Court, of course, now is Celebrities. So it's interesting to know that this jazz band played at Celebrities, you know, which is also Dante's Inferno and a whole bunch of things, you know. So I've been moved into Chinatown now. There's a Mandarin Gardens. I got a lot of stuff about Mandarin. I love that. But I'll tell you a little bit about the Marco Polo scrapbooks, which I found, again, by accident. The guy I got them from had just got them in from a guy who looks through garbage and bins, and he found these in the garbage. And he was going to rip out some of the photographs and the Bill Haley thing for me. And then I said, no. I looked around, and it was all Marco Polo. And Marco Polo was one of those mythical clubs that nobody had any evidence of. Like there was no photographs, no menus, nothing ever surfaced from the Marco Polo, but they were a great music venue in the 60s. And so there's the owner, Mr. Louis, Victor Louis and the China Dolls. And so this was obviously his scrapbook that he had put together, and it was thrown away. And so there were all of these pages that Mr. Louis had done where he lists every week what's playing in the club. And there's pages and pages of this. You'll see in the top, there's Nina Simone. Interesting, this is the only time she ever played in Vancouver was that engagement. But there's Fifth Dimension and Richard Pryor and Red Fox and all sorts of neat stuff. There's even Harvey Lowe's script for the opening night ceremony, and he's written in ballpoint pen what numbers the band is playing. So it's really neat. You can actually see behind the scenes what a night at the Marco Polo would have been like. And these fabulous photographs. And look at the cocktail dress, or the cocktail waitresses with pink bunny ears. I just love that. You never would have known that's what people were enjoying in Vancouver at the time. So anyway, the Marco Polo was in the old Vancouver, Westminster, and Yukon Railroad Station, and so originally, that's before they built the Great Northern Station on the flats. They used to come in on a trestle into Chinatown, and that's where passengers would come into Vancouver. So I said that to Arthur Irving, my buddy, because I know he's a train nut too, and I said, Arthur, isn't it a shame they tore down the Marco Polo and that beautiful sign is gone forever? And Arthur says to me, he says, it's not gone, it's in my basement. You know? So I didn't believe him, so he took me down there. And Arthur and some friends of his had gone up there with a crane, and I don't know how they did it, because that thing weighed a ton, and they got a piece of the brick wall. And then they brought it down intact, miraculously, and they put it in this box and poured concrete around it to stabilize it, and it weighed a bazillion pounds. And but he had it preserved, which was absolutely astounding. So when Arthur passed away, we made sure that this got into the Railroad Museum in Squamish, which is where it is now. And so now there's a painting that I did for Chip Wilson, and you can see it's kind of hard on this view, but just above the bottom of False Creek, you can see the pilings for the trestle that were still here until the 60s, I think. And that's the old trestle that went into the station that became the Marco Polo. Now this painting, as you can see, was quite the undertaking. We started with some sketches. So Mr. Wilson got me in to do a big commission, and he wanted False Creek. And so I did, a couple of views of False Creek. Since it's Chip Wilson, my drawings were pretty good for this one, you know. So here's them building the Granville Street Bridge, and here's a view looking more west. And he says, okay, I like the west one, but why don't we pull it down and have more of the False Creek Flats? And so I knew what was happening is he's developing all of that land and he owns it. So I think what he wanted was a nice painting of what used to be there in industrial Vancouver, and then of course he's putting his own metro town city on top of it. And actually I'll show you this because I decided to flatten out the horizon. So again, that's a trick I like to do on a big painting like this, where as at the bottom of the painting, the horizon is quite high, so you're looking straight down, and then the horizons actually tilt as you go across the painting. As your head tilts up, just like in real life, the horizon is going to change. So the painting is it's too big to actually see all the detail wide, but you can sort of see a pleasing composition wide. But as you get in close, then you start to really see the detail, and you can't actually see it all in one view. You have to actually physically move around the painting. So as your head is tilting up and down, my perspectives are changing. It's a hard trick to pull off, but it really works. So I use things like aerial photographs because I had to get all the tracks and the roads in the right places. I used from the archives, there's a lot of City of Vancouver engineering maps. This one's from '52. It shows you where all the Great Northern Yards were. I also stitched together a lot of old photographs like this. I could zoom in and get all the garages and balconies and everything. And I got this great photo. John Mackey and the Sun ran it, and so I bumped into John and I asked him if I could get a copy because it was a really great view of all of the industry along Falls Creek that nobody else photographed. It was taken by a Vancouver Sun photographer that had his own little airplane, and he used to tootle around Vancouver and take these fantastic aerial shots. So that helped me a lot. I also used engineering drawings, these aren't engineering, sorry, these are fire insurance maps. These are very helpful. They have them at the archives, also at special collections. Insurance adjusters would have these maps that they go over every square block of Vancouver, and they show you what buildings are where and what they're made of. So like wood or concrete or this kind of thing, and it's for insurance purposes. But if I can't find an aerial photograph anywhere, and despite all my digging, at least I know I can go to the fire insurance maps and I can fill in, the odd little thing that I can't find otherwise. And if it's a certain shape house, you think, okay, it's a Edwardian Vancouver house. It probably looks like this, and my guesstimates are pretty good. So there's the finished painting. There's the art installers are beside me, and they're really big guys. I mean, they make me look tiny, and the painting makes them look tiny. So. So I'll show you a couple of movie theaters. We'll just go through some theaters that I don't need to explain what you're looking at. You know what you're looking at. It's the Bay. Here's the Park. Stanley, love that. The Hollywood, done a wonderful restoration of that. The Ridge, unfortunately, this is the only one. This is the newest of all the theaters that I'm just showing you, and it's the only one that's demolished. All the rest are still there. Interestingly, the client I was doing these for, he wanted them painted the year that they were built. And isn't it interesting that the 1950 cars that are in front of the Ridge look so dated, and the Ridge itself looks timeless. It looks absolutely modern. So this is something I'm working on right now. Completely different, and it's a work in progress, so forgive the rough edges. But this is kind of combining my love of the 1907 Pantages, which I can't seem to get away from, and also a bit of my rock history, because this kind of looks like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, with the collage, which I really love that idea. So I thought, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take pictures of all the stuff that I've saved, all the balcony pieces and all the plasterwork, and I'm going to warp it in Photoshop so it all is where it's supposed to be, and then collage it all in there. And then I'm going to take all the people that maybe were on that stage at any given time and throw them on the stage. And the audience, we all have a story. And so it's got 110 years of history kind of all collaged together. And I've even written graffiti on the walls, and it's all like stories. And some of the ones in handwriting are all ones that were told to me personally by people who used to work there back in the 40s and 50s. And it's wonderful because so many of these people are gone now. So at least their stories are captured. Now, with this one, I need about another 100 people because it really needs a lot more in it. So if you or anybody you know has anything to do with this space at all, if you were ever there when it was the Avon, let's say, or the City Nights back in the 70s, or even seeing Bruce Lee films when it was a Kung Fu theater, when it was the Sun Sing. If you have any stories and you'd like to be in this thing, let me know, and I'll take your pictures and I'll jot down your stories, and you can be part of this painting, which I hope to get done in the next year or so. And with that, I have a lot of stuff I could show you about film history, but I don't have time to do it. I have a lot of scripts, and I have a lot of production ephemera. One of the cool things that I like, that thing I love, is this title card that's from TransCanada Films, and I'm holding it here with Maison Bush. His dad was Bert Bush, who was a film editor and did optical effects, starting at TransCanada Films, and then he had his own place called the Bush Edit House, and they did a lot of stuff for CBC. They did The Littlest Hobo back in the 60s. They did TV commercials, and they even, Bush even did the kittens that are playing in front of the restricted movie thing. When you remember back in the 70s, you'd see the kittens playing. Yeah, Bert actually did that. Well, here this is an actual hand-painted title card, and all of the titles on all the Hollywood films were done like this. They would actually shoot this, and then through optical processes that are more complicated than I can figure it. I'll show you what happens. This is the last scene in your film, and then you can actually put the title on top of it. All right? Isn't that cool? I love that, yeah. And so with that is the end of my presentation.
Tune, jam session.